Yes, you can applaud. Yes. It's the Weddle sisters. We have to. So thank you both so much for being here again. This is a wonderful day for me. You know why? Because I get to hear you guys twice. And there's already 2 of you, so that's 4 times. Actually, it's just always great to have you. So, and they're stepping in. Deb Jackman is under the weather and not able to make it in. So they've agreed at the last minute to step in and actually lead our music as well as give us our special music today. So thank you. Yeah. So welcome everyone as always to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane. It's great to have you. It is our mission to create a nourishing liberal religious home and to champion justice, diversity, and environmental stewardship in our wider world. Or as we say in short, to create community, find meaning, and work for justice. I want to begin as usual by embracing all that you bring with you to this space, your unique beliefs, your background, your lifestyle, your experiences, all that helps make you who you are is welcome here today. And this includes those of you in this room, as well as those of you who are streaming with us and perhaps even Zooming with us this morning, as well as those who may be joining us for the first time. You're equally as welcome. We're so glad that you're here today. Before we take a... What's that? I don't have a puppet today. No, somebody else is going to do the story, though, and it's pretty interesting. But it's important that you brought your grandmother today for that. Do you have a grandmother here? No? Well, we'll have to leave you out. No. I'm teasing Thea. The great-grandmother, yes. She's a great-grandmother. Okay, well, your great-grandmother will work, Theo, so I'm glad. So anyway, where was I? Well, I do want to start by acknowledging the death of Sandy Williams, who was a real important activist in our community, a friend of this congregation, somebody who did so much, working to establish SCAR and the Carl Maxey Center and keep the Black Lens going. And she was active in both racial justice as well as LGBTQ rights. And she was, of course, as many of you I think would know, killed in a plane crash earlier this week, along with some of her friends and other members of our community. So it's been a really tough week here in Spokane to try to deal with this news. And I didn't want us to get too far into our service before I, formally say how sad her loss is, I know, to all of us as well as to our entire community. So. When these things happen, I think it is especially important to be able to look around and see the friendly faces, the people in our lives that are important to us, and to take a few moments to really appreciate them. And I'm glad we have this ritual in our service each Sunday where you're able to take a few moments to greet one another in the morning. So please take a few moments to do so now. Thank you, Theo. Thank you. We have a budding musician in our midst. Okay, and as always, I hope you'll stay around for social hour following our service, but let's move forward now by lighting our chalice, the symbol of our unity and our solidarity, of our openness and our inclusion, of our community and our individual uniqueness. May this small flame be our offering of warmth to those who are cold and alone, and a light to those in darkness. May it be a flame that ignites justice in our world and a beacon of hope to those in need, and may it reflect at least a spark of truth wherever truth has been lost and cast a healthy shadow of doubt wherever it's been found.
Good morning. Good. Our morning reading, first reading, is entitled The Bright Thread of Hope by Gretchen Haley. There is too much beauty in this world to give up on it yet. And it is always too soon to surrender to cynicism. Bring your doubts, your skepticism, your downright confusion, even your bitterness. But in the midst of all these, in the center, wrap your tender fingers around that still bright thread of hope. Feel in your heart that still steady hunger for something more. The vision we glimpse every day in the rising sun across the foothills, the light that spreads across the face of the one we love, the look of knowing that there is all there is to know and still loving life, loving us just as it is, just as we are. For this hour, we come to celebrate, to praise, to give thanks, to refuse to give up, to steady ourselves, keepers of hope, brave builders of this still possible world. Come, let us worship together.
Our next hymn is number 123, Spirit of Life. We invite you to stand as you're willing and able and sing along with us. Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Thank you so much. We are now going to kindle our candles of care for those who are most on our hearts and minds this morning, and we begin, as we have been for some time now, a candle for the people on the Ukrainian people, as well as people in other areas of that world who are being most impacted by the violence there. We also want to kindle a candle for all the lives lost in that tragic plane crash earlier this week. Nancy Avery has asked us to kindle a candle, especially celebrating the life and mourning the death of Patricia Hicks, who was on board the plane. She says Pat was a member of the LGBTQ Seniors of the Inland Northwest for the past year and is going to be greatly missed. It's a community that meets in our space at least once a month. And just yesterday, she said another prominent member of the local LGBTQ community passed away unexpectedly, Danny Hawkins, a past board member of Outspoken. So we kindle a candle in his honor as well. And it's obviously been a very difficult week for the LGBTQ community as a whole, among others in Spokane this week. So we kindle a candle for all of our friends who are being impacted by the shock and grief of this difficult week. And let's take a moment of silence, embracing others who are in our hearts this morning. And as always, you're welcome to name them aloud at this time if you'd like.
I'm remembering Larry Richards. Larry is living in New Zealand, and he will be ending his life this week, Thursday, a.m. on New Zealand time, which will be Wednesday at 3 p.m., 2 p.m. Spokane time. He will be in the home of his very dear friends that he's been living with in New Zealand. They said they would be playing Beethoven, and he will be sitting in his lazy boy looking out at the lake.
Those named aloud and those embraced in our silence and all those who are suffering in our world at this hour, we hold in our community with compassion. And we now gratefully give and receive this morning's offering, which helps sustain this community and our mission to the larger world.
This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest
Thank you so much. At this point, I invite any children to come forward for a time for all ages. All right, good to see everybody this morning. So today, as we remember people that we've lost this week and 21 years ago on 9/11, I also want us to remember that this September 11th is Grandparents' Day. So put your hands on your heart if you've ever felt loved by a grandparent. Yeah. I shared about the history of this holiday last year, but I wanted to share it again since I think the grown-ups may have forgotten. So, little history lesson. It was established in 1979 by a West Virginian named Marion McQuaid, and it's a day to recognize and celebrate that special role that grandparents and grandfriends play in the lives of children. And President Jimmy Carter had these official words to say about it. Grandparents are our continuing tie to the near past, to the events and beliefs and experiences that so strongly affect our lives and the world around us. Whether they are our own grandparents or surrogate grandparents who fill some of the gaps in our mobile society, our senior generation also provides our society a link to our national heritage and traditions. We all know grandparents whose values transcend passing fads and pressures and who possess the wisdom of distilled pain and joy. Because they are usually free to love and guide and befriend the young without having to take too much responsibility for them, they can often reach out past pride and fear of failure and close the space between generations. So to the grandparents in and outside of this room and in our hearts, we thank you for your wisdom and your grace and your friendship. And now, instead of a story, I have a bit of an announcement. And you kids are my props for this announcement. All right, so turn around and wave everybody. Wave at everybody. Show them how special and cute you are. Okay. So as Todd has said before, the demographic makeup of our church is not unique. We follow the trend of having more older people than younger people in our congregation. In fact, did you know that there are more grandparents today than ever before? The Legacy Project estimates that by the year 2030, when Max is 18, 1 in every 5 Americans will be over 65. For the first time in history, people age 65 and older will outnumber people under age 5. And what an amazing opportunity that provides for intergenerational relationships. As you know, supporting the spiritual growth of our children, youth, and their families is vital to our Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane's shared ministry. We can do this through multi-generational activities, as well as through programs that are specifically for children and youth. Currently, we offer a children's chapel each Sunday morning during the second service, and we would love your help. There's no prep required. You will just escort the children with me after the time for all ages, help them with our activity of the day, engage in some reflective conversations, and help clean up. There are other ways that you can help too. The children really enjoy homemade goodies and fresh fruit on Sunday mornings, and someone forgot to pick up juice boxes when she went to Costco for our fall snack haul. So sorry kids, it's water only today. Until someone from the congregation buys you juice boxes. Not to put a guilt trip on any of you. Water's great too, right? It's the most hydrating thing we can have. So, sorry guys. Our RE mission is to give our children and youth the tools that they need to move through this world with compassion, integrity, and the ability to think critically. If you would like to help us enact this mission, please let me know. You can find me after the service or email me at the email address that's on the back of your program. Thank you, and happy Grandparents' Day. And now join me in singing these children, my props for this morning's announcement, to our time for all ages, or to our children's chapel.
For our meditation this morning, feel free to get yourself comfortable. Close your eyes if you prefer. And the morning meditation is written by Parker J. Palmer. It's entitled, "Everything Falls Away." He begins with a quote by William Stafford. "There's a thread you follow. It goes among the things that change, but it doesn't change." Sooner or later, everything falls away. You, the work you've done, your successes large and small, your failures too. Those moments when you were light, along with the times when you became one with the night. The friends, the people you loved who loved you, those who might have wished you ill, none of this is forever. All of it is soon to go, or going, or long gone. Everything falls away except the thread you followed, unknowingly all along. The thread that strings together all you've been and done. The thread you didn't know you were tracking until, toward the end, you see that the thread is what stays as everything else falls away. Follow that thread as far as you can, and you'll find it does not end, but weaves into the unimaginable vastness of life. Your life never was the solo turn it seemed to be. It was always part of the great weave of nature and humanity, an immensity we come to know only as we follow our own small threads to the place where they merge with the boundless whole. Each of our threads runs its course, then joins in life together. This magnificent tapestry, this masterpiece in which we live forever.
So it's such a beautiful reading. I'm not going to give a formal reading today, but I wanted to take a couple of moments to comment on the song that you guys sang earlier, This Land Is My Land by Woody Guthrie. I think today we sort of take it for granted that if we want to take a road trip, we just get in the car and go, particularly if we cross into another state or maybe even go on a tour of the country. Do it without a second thought, but that wasn't always the case in this country. It really came after problems associated with the Dust Bowl, which caused a mass migration west and a lot of hostility towards those people who were coming to take our jobs and to take these strangers that were going to enter into our communities. And so laws were changed so that people could move safely by right across this country that we are presumably all a part of, from California to the New York Highlands. In fact, the term hobo, which was a derogatory term used for many of those travelers heading west, is in reference initially to the Hobokens, the folks from Hoboken, New Jersey. So It's something we take for granted today. And at the same time, we have a history of communities trying to keep certain folks out of their neighborhoods, right? We have a history in this community of redlining, and those redlining statutes are still on the books. They're not enforced, but they're still on the books in Spokane. Trying to get that changed. And there's a tendency to want to demonize and criminalize those who are afraid of coming into our communities. And today I think about what's happening in my own neighborhood in the West Hills, where about a mile up the road there's an old hotel that we can repurpose as transitional housing for folks trying to get on their feet and out of camp hopelessness. And we're trying to redline them. We're criminalizing them. At least some are. In order to justify saying, not in my backyard. Which really isn't their backyard. It's a mile up the road, but it was very difficult times. I was down at the Camp Hope just briefly this week. Some of you might have saw the little minister's minute I did. And I talked with a very nice woman after I got done with that, who was clearly not a drug addict, clearly a very intelligent person who could articulate very easily what was going on in her life and why she was there. And part of what she told me is, I have income. I have benefits that come to me and other sources of income. I don't make enough to pay for a roof over my head. I just don't have it. And people who live here, they get a $50 raise. It means nothing. They can't do anything with that. And that's why a lot of folks who are there and in circumstances like that across the country and in places around the world, as a matter of fact, that's why they're there. Not because they're criminals, not because they're dangerous, but because we have created a system that doesn't work for everybody. And now it is up to us as a community to do what we can and what we must to see that this is not a permanent part of what Spokane looks like, or what our state looks like, or what our nation looks like, at the very least. If people can't afford to have a roof over their heads, especially en masse, there's something wrong with the system. We've got to fix it. And people have a right in this country to live where they want. Nothing is more established law or established morally than that truth. So, thank you for reminding me of that with that very timely song by the great Woody Guthrie. By the way, there's a collection, we talked a little bit, there's a collection of his songs that is called the Dust Bowl album. I don't know if you're ever interested, but that you can look that up on Google and you can hear a lot of his other songs too. Oh, anyone can. So.
When I think back on these times and the dreams we left behind, I'll be glad 'cause I was blessed to get to have you in my life. When I look back on these days, I'll look and see your face. You were right there for me. In my dreams I'll always see you soar above the sky.
Thank you. When you guys sang your first opening song during our first service, I said, that's the act I have to follow the rest of the day, right? So I've gotten used to it now. The highlight of the service is over. It has ended. But since you're here and since I prepared a sermon, I'll give it anyway. So it was 11 years ago when, quite by accident, I began calling myself an atheist, although I sometimes add that just because I'm an atheist doesn't mean I don't believe in God. That's a paradox. I'll explain that in a little bit. But first, a little bit about why I began referring to myself as such. During my very first week here as your minister in Spokane, just a few days in, I was contacted by a TV reporter wanting to interview me about a controversy in our community involving a bus advertisement that had initially been refused by the Spokane Transit Authority. But after its sponsors took the matter to court, the STA decided to allow it after all. The simple ad, how many of you remember, do any of you remember this? It's been a while. A couple hands, yeah. So the simple ad, comprised of white letters on a blue background, stated, "Are you good without God? Millions are." Although it was sponsored by the Spokane Coalition of Reason, a local group of humanists and atheists, it was part of a nationwide campaign by the United Coalition of Reason that was raising awareness by stirring up similar controversy with billboards and bus signs all across the country. No matter where these campaigns occurred, they got lots of free publicity by creating such controversy, either because they were displayed or because they were banned from being displayed. So it always ended up in the local news. It couldn't fail. According to the organization's website at the time, its purpose was working to raise the visibility of local non-theistic groups all over America. Nationally, we do this by conducting campaigns which highlight the fact that non-theists live in every community across America. Locally, we do this by promoting informal cooperation among local groups, hosting local coalition websites, training group leaders, and funding publicity campaigns. So that's where it came from. And I knew nothing about this controversy since I'd only just arrived here, but was happy to tell the local media how pleased I was that freedom of speech had proven victorious and that the sponsors of this ad were not going to be discriminated against because some might disagree with their message. On the 6 o'clock news that evening, the reporter stated, "Todd Eckloff is the atheist minister of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane." And supports the ads. Well, I'm glad they changed their minds and are going to let them run the spots, he said. We want people to be able to express themselves on par with everyone else, regardless of their beliefs. I was astonished to find myself identified as an atheist, since I had never defined myself as such, and the reporter never asked me anything about my theological beliefs. From this, I inferred they must have Googled atheist in Spokane. And my name came up since I, at the time, had occasionally referred to myself as an atheistic mystic. I'm guessing they figured that was close enough. And I'll explain by what I mean by that phrase momentarily too, but at the time I thought, I haven't been here a week at UUCS, and it is now going to be known as the Atheist Church because of me. Let's see if I make it a second week. So atheistic mystic is a term that I borrowed from my favorite social psychologist, Erich Fromm, who used it to describe himself. In his book, The Art of Loving, Fromm outlines humanity's theological development throughout history. In the beginning of this development, he says, we find a despotic, jealous God who considers man whom he created as his property and is entitled to do with him whatever he pleases. This is a very primitive stage that is often accompanied by human attempts to appease the angry gods through rituals and sacrifices. Right? Why are the gods hammering away at those clouds? Get somebody to kill, and we'll appease them. So, Fromm calls the second stage of theological development the covenantal stage, at which point humans make a contract with their god or gods, agreeing to obey a set of religious laws and engage in certain religious rituals in exchange for their gods or God's favor. And if they do what they believe their god or gods want, they can avoid disasters and displeasure and even be rewarded with health and prosperity. In the Hebrew religion, as Fromm points out, God makes a covenant with Noah in which he promises never to destroy the human race again, a covenant by which he himself is bound. You see, that's the difference. Now we got some leverage. At the covenantal stage, people believe that they have some control over God's behavior. So when misfortune does fall upon them anyway, disasters, diseases, war, and so on, they have to find a scapegoat to explain it. Somebody else has broken covenant and displeased the angry gods. Perhaps the heathens, or the apostates, or the strangers among us. If we cleanse ourselves and our society of these evils, then God's favor will be restored. Or so they believe. But at the third stage of our theological maturation, Fromm says God ceases to be a person, a man, a father, but becomes the symbol of the principle of the manifoldness of phenomena. At this stage, he says God is transformed from the figure of a father into the symbol of his principles, those of justice, truth, and love. God is truth, God is justice. At this stage, then, God is not a divine being, but the values that we devote ourselves to. God is not a person, but a principle that transcends convention and covenants. At this stage, you might say, God is doing the right thing. Fromm says God cannot have a name. A name always denotes a thing or a person or something finite. How can God have a name if God is not a person, not a thing? Therefore, the truly religious person, he says, does not love God as a child loves its father or mother, but sees God as a symbol of humanity's striving for love, truth, and justice, and the full unfolding of human potential. That's what God is. Humanity's striving for our highest principles and fullest individual potential. When this happens, he says, one does not speak about God, nor even mention his name. To love God, if one were to use this word, would mean then to long for the attainment of the full capacity to love, because that's our highest potential in Fromm's opinion, the fullest capacity to love, which means respecting others and working to help them grow and achieve their fullest development. To long for the attainment of the full capacity to love, for the realization of that which God stands for in oneself. But God, in this sense, represents humanity's and the individual's highest aspirations, our fullest potential. So to speak of God reduces it to a thing, to an idol, rather than to those quiet principles and values that we strive to live by. It is to kill something that is nebulous, evolving, mysterious. Thus, the atheistic mystic, having arrived at this final stage of theological maturation, does not speak or even think about God as a person with a will and a mind, but as one's devotions to those highest principles found in the hopes and religions of people all over the world. All of this is why, like Fromm, I refer to myself as an atheistic mystic, because I don't believe in a person named God. I don't believe there is an all-powerful, all-knowing, magical entity hovering about in the ether, obsessing with everything I think or do. But I do believe in many of the principles human beings have aspired toward throughout our existence, like compassion and justice and equality, along with those values of our own liberal tradition, freedom, reason, and tolerance. This is also why I became a Unitarian Universalist, because it is a religion focused on universal principles, not upon dogmas and creeds or covenants and conventions, or upon a prescribed or required belief in God. It's a liberal religion. Our values are rooted in the Enlightenment principles of freedom, reason, and tolerance, most recently fleshed out in the Unitarian Universalist Association's adoption of those 7 principles in 1985. Right, our religion's been around a lot longer than that, in the U.S. at least since the Enlightenment period. But 1985 is when we began to articulate our values in those 7 principles, and they're pretty good principles. But if you read those 7 principles, you're going to find those core values of freedom, reason, and tolerance. It's another way of expressing those, of fleshing them out. And they're pretty good principles. Sadly, for the past several years, the UUA, Unitarian Universalist Association, has been regressing to more primitive theological stages. Most recently, it has redefined our liberal religion as a covenantal religion, right? Second level. Last year, for example, UUA President Susan Frederick Gray wrote that covenant lies at the heart of our faith, a shared agreement of how we should be together. Our religion is made from an ongoing, interlocking, and organically growing series of promises we make within our communities, congregations, and the world. I know you're looking at me like, what? I didn't make any of those promises. Did I miss that service? We don't know what covenant she's talking about, since none of us have been involved in them. A covenant involves us being involved in them. Right? If we're going to have an agreement, we have to agree. And in 2015, the UUA also established a recovenanting task force with the goal of changing it from a member service organization to a covenantal one, whatever that means. Most recently, the UUA has decided to rewrite its bylaws with a special emphasis on Article 2. That's the article containing those 7 principles. The UUA leaders are now talking about replacing the principles with a list of 7 words that they are referring to as values: love, interdependence, equity, generosity, justice, evolution, pluralism/diversity, leaving out words like freedom, reason, and tolerance, along with democracy and individualism, which are contained in those 7 principles. This move should not be surprising given the UUA's intent on turning ours into just another primitive authoritarian religion. As such, it has already regularly and publicly violated several of our most cherished principles. Like number 1, the worth and dignity of every person. Number 2, the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And principle number 5, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic processes within our congregations and in society at large. Mid-level theology rooted in convention and covenant and control cannot abide these liberal principles because they are rooted in individual freedom. Those principles simply don't work. They have to go. if we're going to become an authoritarian organization. Alas, if this were not bad enough of a downgrade, the UUA is now increasingly edging us toward collectively adopting an even more primitive theological beliefs by shunning and shaming those of us who are non-believers. In Reverend Frederick Muir's 2015 lecture to UU ministers entitled From iChurch to Beloved Community, Ecclesiology and Justice, which has become the blueprint for the institutional changes the UUA leadership is now undertaking, Muir says one of the things most detrimental to Unitarian Universalism's survival is what he calls its North Atlantic look, as reflected in our demographics, theology, and epistemology. If we grow more cut off from the U.S. population, or it will become more cut off from the U.S. population unless we start reflecting our society's true diversity. And certainly, I mean, racial diversity and other forms of diversity is what we want in our churches. But what is this? What is this theological, epistemological? I mean, that's asking for us to change our fundamental belief of truth, our sort of fundamental values and beliefs, right? That's getting at something that's very deep and personal that is part of the reason we're all here. And Muir goes on to suggest our liberal religion needs to become more authoritarian and ecclesiastical by becoming more spiritual and adopting a doctrine of church, his term. 2 years later, in June 2017, the same year that the UUA declared ours is a white supremacist religion, its UU World Magazine published an article entitled Moving Beyond Whites-Only Theology. Its author writes, to put it rather bluntly, atheism is a white thing. Going on to explain, I contend that people of color have, by and large, clung to their beliefs in God in whatever form, not because they are insufficiently educated, but because it is God who has given them the strength to endure, resist, and in some small ways overcome systems of racism and white supremacy in the myriad ways it has persisted for centuries. It takes a certain amount of freedom and privilege to denounce the existence of God. I believe any movement in Unitarian Universalism to make God unwelcome in our sanctuaries is effectively akin to posting whites-only signs on our doors. Yeah, I mean, the entire article is just baffling due to its lack of reason, really. But firstly, I really don't know what movement, of any movement in our sanctuaries to make those who believe in God less welcome. We are a religion, rather, comprised of believers and non-believers. Nonetheless, the idea that ours is supposed to be a catch-all religion that must lack any norms or traditions of its own in order to be of interest to everyone is never what Unitarianism has been about, and it is a perversion of what universalism means. This notion that we must radically alter our own liberal values and traditions in order to attract people from other religions is simply bizarre. What religion does that? Was Transylvania's 16th century Unitarian bishop Ferenc David wrong when he was imprisoned and slowly put to death for claiming that praying to Jesus made no more sense to him than praying to Mary? Should we now pray to Jesus in our services in order to attract more Baptists and Pentecostals to our community? Should we pray to Mary and embrace the Holy Trinity as Unitarians in order to attract more Catholics? I'm nothing against Baptists, Pentecostals, and Catholics. I mean, they'd be welcome here, but I'm not going to change what I believe or say to have them come here, right? I'm glad there are a variety of churches. There's choices, right? So, is not praying to Jesus also a white thing? Is it white privilege to deny the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost? And if it is true that people believe in a God as a source of strength in difficult times, which seems true to me, I think that's probably true for a lot of people who believe in God, that it is a source of strength in difficult times. How does the author explain that the vast majority of white people believe in God, compared to only a fraction who don't? Either by this same illogic, we must conclude that believing in God is a white thing resulting from white privilege, or that most white people experience suffering, adversity, and injustice in the world, and thus, in his words, cling to their beliefs in God. That's the logic that's being used. The author, who commits really way too many logical fallacies to go into here, including his criticism of our commitment to reason itself, clearly understands nothing about logic and is incapable of using it. Nevertheless, he has been involved with the UUA's commission on, guess what, institutional change. No surprise there, given what we see happening in our beleaguered religion these days. Yet contrary to what this author and the reporter who interviewed me several years ago believe, ours is not an atheist religion. There are atheists among us as well as believers. Most of the believers probably have unorthodox beliefs about God, but they still believe, as I often hear them put it, in something. The outright atheists like me who say I don't believe in God remain the minority, and that's fine. Ours, rather, is a liberal religion where believers and non-believers assemble together based upon our common commitment to those cherished values that I again like to summarize as, in Enlightenment terms, freedom, reason, and tolerance. When I returned to the pulpit following that news report all those years ago, nobody said anything about it, and nobody seemed to care. This put me at ease, and I really began considering the distinction between defining myself as atheistic rather than just simply as atheist. To be an atheistic mystic is an unfamiliar term to most, and it takes a lot of explaining to understand. Nor does it necessarily mean that one doesn't believe in God, only that one doesn't believe in talking about God, because it is too grand and nebulous a subject to responsibly discuss. As in all mystical traditions, as soon as we try to grasp it, it becomes ungraspable. To even speak God's name becomes a mistake, leading to idolatry and theological error. But as I thought about what I really meant and believed, I realized that the term atheistic mystic was not only confusing but disingenuous on my part. For when asked if I believe in God, I knew that most people were asking me if I believed in a person named God with a mind and a will of its own, hovering about in the ether somewhere, obsessing about what I and others think and do. Or that is magically orchestrating my life so that I have good things happen to me, or punishes me for my errors, or at the very least is putting difficulties in front of me to help me learn some important lesson so my soul can evolve over many lifetimes. No, I don't believe in that. For me, the answer is clear. No, I do not believe in such a person, nor that God is any kind of person at all. So rather than jumping through intellectual hoops to explain this, I realized how much more efficient and truthful it is just to say, I'm an atheist. And I've been grateful to that presumptive reporter ever since for unknowingly pushing me in this direction. Yet when I do engage in deeper theological conversation, my answer is more nuanced, like Jesus, who defined God as love, or Gandhi, who said God is truth, or Islam that says God is mercy, or the Hebrew prophets who say God is justice. I have no trouble theologizing my principles, or theologizing about my principles. I believe in truth, in love and mercy and justice, as well as our own liberal religious values, freedom, reason, and tolerance. And if we were to all agree that these are what we mean by God, then I must admit that I also believe in God. Right? If that is, we agree that God is freedom, for example, meaning God and freedom are equal, or God and freedom are synonymous, that they are the same thing, then I cannot logically say I believe in one and not the other. In other words, when functioning at Erich Fromm's highest level of theological development, at which God is not a person but a principle, or as he puts it, the symbol of the principles God is supposed to represent, then obviously I do believe in God. The problem remains, however, this word, God. God is so potent that it is difficult for us to hear without experiencing its historic, archetypal, emotional, and psychological implications, if not baggage. In our society in particular, to say God is love, for example, sounds like one is saying that love is the same thing as the Abrahamic God worshipped by Jews, Christians, and Muslims. So if I say I agree that God is love, it doesn't indicate that I think God is the principle love, but that God is a person who is loving. God is love, God is a loving person. That's how it translates. So here again, it becomes easier and more honest for me to simply acknowledge that I'm an atheist who is devoted to the principles of freedom, reason, and tolerance, along with some others. This then is what I mean by just because I'm an atheist doesn't mean I don't believe in God. I don't mean, as another saying goes, that there's no such thing as an atheist in a foxhole. That's not it at all. I mean that when the question about God's existence is put to me in simple dualistic terms in which there is only one binary choice, I must answer no. I don't believe in God because the idea that such a person exists seems unreasonable to me, to be polite. But if the question is layered, and I were to answer it from Fromm's three-dimensional overview, I would answer, no, I don't believe in a primitive, sadistic, despotic God. No, I don't believe in a person, not even in a benevolent father figure named God. But yes, I do have principles and values that I am devoted to, and if I were to theologize about these by equating them with God, then yes, I am a believer. Of course, if these principles are the same as God, then there's no point in saying so. I can just talk about my principles, which may be shared by others no matter how our theological beliefs might otherwise differ. Which brings me back to being an atheistic mystic, the stage at which Fromm says one does not speak about God nor even mention its name. Thank you.
This next song we will be singing is actually not a hymn, but a song written and made popular by John Lennon in 1971 called Imagine. We would like to invite you to sing along with us, and please stand if you are willing and able. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us. Above us only sky. Imagine all the people and there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. Oh, you may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will live as one. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger. A brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. Oh, you may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you will join us, and the world will live as one.
For our benediction, I share with you a blessing song by Miriam Therese Winter. May the blessing of God go before you. May her grace and peace abound. May her spirit live within you. May her love wrap you round. May her blessing remain with you always. May you walk on holy ground. Amen. Blessed be. Salam alaikum and shalom.
Shalom.